Today, we become legends.
So it's been almost 4 years since I last made this video, which is a bit crazy to think about, and with a bunch of new gods, meta changes, conquest changes, and more, I think it's time to ask that question once again. What is the best single class team for conquest in Smite? If you haven't seen the first edition of the video, there's a few ground rules to cover first. We're trying to create the most competitively viable team for a conquest match, filling all 5 roles with picks from just one class. I'll also be keeping in the spirit of a regular conquest team, which basically means for solo I'll be trying to find a god that works well as a tank. For ADC, I'll be trying to find a god that works well with auto attacks, etc. Rather than just putting the 5 best burst mages for the meta onto one team and calling it a day, because that's boring. Also, this will be a team for the current meta as of early year 11 Smite. Meta strength won't be the only thing I look at, team synergy and how well they fill the playstyle of that role in question will also be very important, but we don't want the worst gods in the game on any of these teams for obvious reasons. Once I've got a team built for each of the 5 classes, we'll determine which one is the overall best single class conquest team. Alright, but with that said, let's jump in with our first class, the Assassins. Here's our choices. So first up, the ADC role, which is not ideal for Assassins, and the only one here that has been consistently somewhat viable there would be Set. This guy can play 4 roles pretty effectively, and while ADC is definitely not his best one, he is basically the only assassin that truly works here, unless you want to meme it up with something like Mercury, Baka, or Kali. Set is just the best of these picks overall in my opinion for ADC. Next up, supporting that Set in the duo lane, we have a few options for assassins. Fenrir, Circuit, and Naja are the 3 traditionally viable support assassins, and while we haven't seen them actually see play in quite a long time, they're still the best this class has to offer in terms of supports. Naja is typically best with other beads burners and strong burst follow up on his ultimate from a mage, and Fenrir, while strong, is a bit outclassed by Circuit here in my opinion. Given all these teams will be single damage type, percent protection reduction and true damage will be very important, and Circuit does have that true damage on her ultimate that will be useful here, so we'll go with her for support. Next up is the jungle role, which of course basically all assassins are viable, so we're spoiled for choice here. The top meta junglers at the moment are Thor, Thanatos and Susano. Thor and Susano are pretty tempting for their CC output, which can be hard to come by on assassin teams, but overall Thanatos is not only the stronger meta pick at the moment, but also has built-in penetration to help with the single damage type issues and an execute that will be very useful in taking down enemy tanks that stack full physical defense against this team. So we'll go with the Reaper for our jungler. Mid is next, where fairly recently we saw quite a few assassins are truly viable there. The most common ones, other than Set who's already taken, were Pele, Kamazots and Cleaner. Due to the team's general lack of good CC and engage potential, plus her just being a better meta pick overall in my opinion, I'll go with Pele for our assassin mid laner. And finally we have the solo lane, where bruiser and tank assassins have seen some success over the years. Raven, Thor, Ratatoska and Fenrir are the main ones I'm looking at here. Overall, I think Thor fits the team best. He has solid CC to bring the team up to a decent level of engage and lockdown, while also combining nicely with Thanatos for that double semi-global presence. His laning phase is a bit slow, but with a Pele Thanatos mid-jungle combo, this team should not be left wanting for early pressure anyway. So that's the full assassin team. Set Circuit duo lane, Thanatos jungle, Pele mid, and Thor solo. Let's see how they stack up to the others. Switching up the damage types for a minute, let's talk about a class that will definitely struggle to fill all 5 roles, that being Guardians. Kicking things off with the most problematic role for them, ADC. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I want to keep the theme of the role and not just throw in a full damage burst Guardian, so our main options for ADC are Sylvanas, Bake Kujira, and maybe Maui if you're memeing. Yeah, I told you this one will be hard. While having Bake for solo will be really nice, I think that role will be much easier to fill with a decent pick than ADC is, so we'll go with the Whale for our Guardian ADC. He's simply insane in the current meta. Next up is the Guardian's main role, support, and we of course have many options here. The top meta supports at the moment are Athena, Geb, Ganesha, Charon, Ares, Yamoja, and Sobek. To not spoil anything, I won't tell you why I'm not picking certain ones of these here, but my overall choice for support is Ares, both because he's incredibly strong at the moment, but also because Guardians have plenty of strong CCs that can burn beads for his ultimate, and his incredible early damage and pressure will be nice for getting the Guardian team off the ground in the early game. Plus, he makes for a very nice kill lane in duo when paired with Bake. Moving on to jungle, there have been a handful of viable Guardians that have found success in the jungle role in the past, most notably Athena and Cabrakan. However, Athena is just much stronger for the role at the moment and the meta in general. We even saw her pulled out at Worlds Finals at the end of last year in this role, so we'll go with her for the team. Next up is mid, which isn't the worst role for Guardians overall, but definitely isn't the best. We're mainly looking at Cabrakan or Charon here, and I think for the team, we'll go with Charon. He has seen some minor mid lane success due to his great wave clear and damage output, plus he combines nicely with Athena for the double global presence. And finally, we have the solo lane, by far the second best role for Guardians, with a few that are specifically only viable there. Artio, Cabrakan, Cerberus, Jormungandr, Kuzumbo, and Sobek are the main ones to look at here, and I think after being passed over for a bunch of other roles, it's finally time for Cabrakan to get drafted to the team. His early pressure and high damage output will definitely help out the Guardian team, and he can more than hold his own against most solo picks. So that's the full Guardian team. Back 8 Ares duo lane, Athena jungle, Charon mid, and Cabrakan solo. Honestly, not as bad as you might have thought going into it, with the only super weak pick here being back 8 ADC, but given his absolute meta dominance, even that pick is passable. Let's see how they compare to our next team, the Hunters. After Guardians, Hunters are probably the second weakest class overall in terms of filling 5 roles effectively, since they really have 2 playstyles, hold left click DPS or ability burst damage. But let's see how they fare. First up, the ADC role, where of course we have myriad options. The strongest meta ADCs right now are Hachiman, Anhur, Rama, and Ishtar. Since this is their main role, I think we'll just go with the current strongest pick for the meta, which is Hachiman by a hair. Supporting that Hachiman though, we are extremely limited for options. Depending on your definition of viability, you could argue there aren't any viable Hunter supports, but 2 that do stand out above the rest are Anhur and Artemis. Both have fairly strong CCs for lockdown, but I think overall Artemis is just a tiny bit better for that purpose, and having a teamfight ultimate that can stun multiple people is going to be very valuable for a team that will be lacking in CC and initiation. Next up, jungle, where we again have a small handful of fringe viable picks depending on your definition, most notably Anhur and Danzaburou. Overall, I think Danza works best here due to his specific increased damage to jungle monsters on his abilities and good clear in general. Next up we have mid, which has quite a few options given it's the secondary role for Hunters after ADC. This is mostly ability based Hunters like AMC, Martikaras, Neith, and Ula, but even some normal auto attack Hunters have seen mid play as well. However, going with an ability based one makes more sense for this team since we already have consistent DPS covered in the ADC role. Of these ability Hunters, it's a hard choice between AMC and Marty right now, but I think overall AMC is stronger for the meta currently. And just like Marty, he has built-in protection shred on his ultimate, which is extremely valuable on these single damage type teams to actually threaten defense stacking tanks. And finally for solo, we once again don't have a lot of grey options. As much as I said I want to keep within the role, tank hunters are just awful in general, especially in solo. And the role has seen its fair share of damage focused metas in the past, so I think I'll go with Ula, who is one of the most successful solo hunters over time. So that's the full hunter team: Hachiman Artemis duo lane, Danzaburou jungle, AMC mid, and Ula solo. Far from ideal, but will it be ranked dead last? We'll find out after we make our final 2 teams. Second to last, but certainly not least, we have the Mage team. Mages as a class are by far the most diverse in terms of flexing into different playstyles and roles, so expect them to do pretty well here. First up, for our ADC, we of course have the 4 dedicated magical ADCs in Kronos, Sol, Olorun, and Freya. None are particularly strong at the moment, with Hunters being favoured in the current ADC meta. Freya is probably the overall strongest, but since this team will lack in consistent DPS, especially to objectives and structures, I think going for one of the consistently ranged gods instead of Freya would be a better fit for the team in this case. Of the remaining ones, I think Olorun fits best and can bring some major teamfight presence and CC with his ultimate that might end up lacking on a full damage team. Supporting that Olorun, we have a handful of really solid options: Aphrodite, Nox, and Baron Samedi being the best among them. Afro is probably the strongest meta pick of the 3, but I think Nox fits better for the team as she actually brings some CC and lockdown to the table that Aphrodite really doesn't. With no traditional tanks to provide that for the team, I think Nox could form that core that allows all of these mages to follow up with big damage. If we went with Afro, the team would be safer for sure, but would struggle to find openings and engage fights due to a lack of good CC. Moving on to the jungle role, we have 2 main options that have been consistently viable here from the mage class, those of course being Ao Kuang and Hebo. This is a pretty clear choice as Hebo really isn't super good in the current meta and Ao Kuang is simply better. It could be a little hard to burn beads so he can get his ults off on this team, but that's why we went with Nox for support, so Ao Kuang jungle it is. Next up, mid, which we of course have basically the entire roster to pick from. The top meta mid mages at the moment are Thoth, Kukulkan, and Janus. All three bring unique strengths to the team, with Thoth's consistent damage from excellent range and built-in percent pen from his passive, Kukulkan's devastating follow-up to a Nox combo with his ultimate and good zone control, and Janus' global mobility and, like Thoth, built-in percent pen from his ultimate. This is definitely a hard choice, and any of these three would be great for the team, but I think Thoth has the most to offer overall. Built-in percent pen is great, as I've mentioned a million times already. He still has good follow-up on a Nox combo, and his glyph will help out a little bit with the team's lack of objective shred and structure damage. And finally, we have the solo lane, where we just recently experienced a meta where this class completely dominated the role. The build and picks that were abused back then have been nerfed into the ground though, so I think we're more so looking at the traditional mage solo picks of Baron Samedi, Zhonghui, and Hades. Baron's lockdown would definitely be appreciated for this team, and while Hades is definitely a stronger meta pick overall, I do think Baron fits best here when combined with Nox from support. It gives the team some actual strong single target lockdown. Still lacking in big AoE CCs, but hey, you've got to suck at something other than single damage type for this video. Mages have still done incredibly well here. And that's your mage team. Ola run Nox duo lane, Aokwang jungle, Thoth mid, and Baron solo. Let's move on to our final class team for the video before we rank these against each other. Alright, so for the warriors, they're a somewhat versatile class, but do mostly fill tank and initiation roles and struggle with going full damage. Let's see how they do. First up, our warrior ADC. The main options here are of course in the form of auto attack warriors: Amaterasu, Bellona, Gilgamesh, Erlangshen, Vamana, and sort of Osiris. None of these are great, but I think the best overall is probably Bellona, as she is at least designed specifically to fight into hunters and other auto attackers pretty well. Her excellent lane clear will also hopefully help her keep up with the other classes that are better picks for the role, and she's just strong in the current meta. Supporting that Bellona, we have some pretty solid options in Horus, Hercules, and to a lesser extent, Guan Yu and Odin. I think the simplest and best way to handle this is just to go with Horus. He was designed for the role and is definitely the best meta pick here. Simple. Moving on to jungle, where we've seen quite a few warriors find major success over the years, most notably Achilles, Erlangshen, Gilgamesh, and to a lesser extent, Nike, Odin, and Osiris. I think the best pick here is probably Gilgamesh or maybe Erlang, but I think Achilles actually fits the team best. We already have one auto attacker in the ADC role, and spoiler alert, we'll have at least one more elsewhere, and I think stacking too many physical auto attackers on one team is just asking for 5 Midgardian males from the enemy. Plus, Achilles having an execute will be very handy since this team's damage output and tank shred will be weaker than normal, so being able to rapid fire delete those tanky targets from 40% health with an execute will be very useful. For mid lane, the only warrior we've seen there recently is Erlangshen, and while others can be fringe viable like Gilga, Wukong, or Chak, I think overall Erlang is just far stronger in the role than any other warrior, and we even saw him at Worlds fairly recently playing mid. And finally, warriors can catch a break as we cover their main role, the solo lane. Of course, all warriors are viable here, but the current top meta ones aside from Bellona and Achilles which are taken consist of Vamana, Wukong, and Osiris. And while we are stacking a bit heavy on the auto attackers here, I think Vamana is simply the strongest pick here by a decent margin. At the very least, having 3 auto attackers on the team will aid in objective shred and sieging, which would normally be very weak for a 5 tank team. But that's your warrior roster: Bellona Horus duo lane, Achilles jungle, Erlang mid, and Vamana solo. Let's see how they stack up. Alright, so with all of our teams fully completed, it's time to do a ranking. Coming in at last place, and I hate to do it, I think the Guardian team is just the weakest here. They do have some very strong meta picks in Bake and Athena, but unless they snowball tremendously, this team is really going to struggle to actually play Conquest effectively. Sure, their team fighting is probably very good, and having a double global is nice as well, but when it comes to taking Gold Furies, Fire Giants, Towers, Phoenixes, etc., this team will simply struggle far too much. They lack shred, they lack poke, they even lack burst to a certain extent. It's just the weakest team here. Sorry, Guardian mains. Tank mains are just having a rough time in general, as I think the warrior team places 4th here. They suffer from many of the same problems as the Guardian team, but to a lesser extent, since warriors in general have a bit more damage and the triple auto attacker comp will be able to deal with objectives quite well. Sieging will still be incredibly weak though, as this team has a major lack of good poke and will struggle to actually get to the Phoenix and stay on it long enough to take it down. Could they snowball early and win that way? Sure, but if they don't, they're gonna struggle. My number 3 team would be the Hunters, which is definitely a change of pace from the 2 tank compositions. Their objective shred and sieging is best in class, but actually getting there will be a struggle. Their early game will be incredibly slow, and their lack of good tanky frontline presence and peel will probably result in them being bowled over in teamfights very often. They are, however, the best class at dealing with single damage type issues, since they have the best access to percent penetration and kin size, plus AMC ultimate to burst down those pesky defense stacking tanks. One thing's for sure though, if this team does get a late game DSI, they're ending it right there and then. These guys will obliterate your towers and phoenixes in seconds. Making it all the way to the second best team of the video is the Assassins, which when I initially started scripting this video was not something I foresaw. Looking at these teams though, the Assassins are surprisingly well balanced. They have a solid frontline and engage from Thor and Circuit, decent tank shred and consistent DPS from Set, though a little bit weak in that regard, great burst damage from Pele and Thanatos, as well as that really nice execute, double semi-global mobility from Thor and Thana to put pressure on the map, plus Circuit movement as well. Their poking is a little bit lacking, so if the game stalemates around Fire Giant or on sieges, they might struggle, but they do still have stun double tap from Thor, death scythe from Thanatos, and skewer from Set, so it's not that bad. This is really the first team that truly has everything covered, though definitely weaker in some areas than others. And finally, that of course leaves us with the Mage team as number one, and they are definitely number one by a wide margin. Just like the Assassin team, the Mages have pretty much every aspect of Conquest success covered. The difference being that they do almost all of these things exceptionally well. They have lockdown and frontline through Nox and Baron, they have AoE burst and zone control through Thoth, they have single target shred through Alkwang and Olarun, they have objective shred and sieging capabilities through Olarun and Thoth's Glyph. There's pretty much nothing this team doesn't do well aside from the obvious single damage type issues, but between Olarun, Thoth's built-in penetration, Soul Reaver, and just general percent pen stacking, I think they do alright. This team, along with maybe the Assassins, are the only team I think could consistently win some games if they just queued ranked like this. Would it be above a 50% win rate? Hell no, but I do think they could score some solid wins for sure. But that's all I've got for today's video. What are your thoughts? Would you have ranked the teams differently or even built them differently to highlight different strengths and cover different weaknesses? Let me know down below and I'll catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.